Where did you work in retail?
I worked at Blast Off in North Hollywood and Earth 2 Comics in Sherman Oaks.
Oh, nice.
So, yes.
I love those stores. They're great.
Me too.
Those are super cool. So what was your experience kind of working retail in comics?
Oh man, working retail in comics is like, I think being a criminal profiler, you get to learn how to make really wide generalizations about what your audience will buy. Like, oh, men will buy Deadpool and women will buy Fables and children will buy Sonic and things like that. It's mostly really amazing because you're working with a community and you have like a shared lexicon, and it's really cool to be able to cultivate relationships there, because a lot of people that I worked with are now, one of them is a producer. She worked on Darkest Minds. One of them, Morgan, she's on tour at Boom right now, interfacing with retailers. Chris Johnson is a comic book artist. Like, all the people that I worked with there that I came up with are now professionals, which is really cool to watch happen.
Nice. That's so funny how it's such a small industry. And it was interesting. I was talking to Philip Sablik, and he was saying that watch out because today's intern will be tomorrow's vice president.
Absolutely.
And it's so true, especially in comics, because we're such a small community of people who are just passionate about what we do.
There's maybe only like 800 people actually working in comics, which is really weird until you start to sort of scrape your way into it, and then you just see the same people over and over and over and over again.
It's kind of wild. It's like you think it's going to be this whole thing and there's going to be so many people, but everyone wants to break into comics. But then like the people who are just consistently making books are those are the people that are going to stay around and kind of continue to go.
I think it's also because you feel, or at least our generation felt very isolated coming up enjoying comics, and it's weird to be like, oh no, we're a club, and here is everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's super interesting because, I used to own Heidi Ho Comics in Santa Monica, and I always felt like I would talk to the person and try to figure out who they are. Like if it was a guy or a woman, I would sell them based on what they're currently reading. So if they're reading Batman, I would sell them Nightwing. If they're reading, Darkness, I'd sell them Witchblade. I would sell them whatever that other book is from that similar title, and I think people kind of respect that, and they're like, oh, this is my thing, this is what I'm into, this is my genre. And once you kind of understand that, and you can see how far you can push them out of the genre or something like that.
It's also that's so funny because that relates back to when someone walks in and they say, I want to start reading comics, what should I read? And you're like, well, that's a really hard question, actually. What do you like? Like, it's this big, comics are such a big abstract thing, and when people say they don't like comics, it makes me sad. And it's kind of like when people say they don't like musicals. I'm like, well, you haven't turned your gaze towards the right one yet, because comics is an incredible medium because there's something for everybody.
True, 100%. No, it's really interesting because I would imagine that, like, it's like watching a TV show. Like sometimes you're going to watch something and like it, and sometimes you're going to watch something and not like it. And it's the same with comics, the same with everything. You just have to kind of figure out what you like.
Imagine that.
I know. That's mind blowing. So how did you go from transitioning from working in retail to doing, to working in comics? What was your first?
It's not a good story, but I'll tell it anyway. So in 2013, Jason Inman, who's my co-writer, he was entering the Top Cow Talent Hunt, which is an amazing thing that Top Cow puts on to cultivate new talent, bring new people in, and have an experience working in professional comics, because working with an editor and working for a publisher is tremendously different from doing creator-owned comics, and you kind of learn how to play on a team in a very safe environment. So I appreciate that they fostered that. But he was entering, and he said, you should enter. And I'd literally never thought about writing comics before in my entire life. I'd read comics since I was a really, really little kid. The first comics I ever read were Babar and Tintin in French, because my mom's family is French.
Nice.
I loved Robin all through the 90s. Chuck Dixon is like one of my all-time favorite writers. And it's one of those things where you're like, oh yeah, this is a job, and people do it, and okay, yeah, I could do that. How hard can it be? It's really hard, as it turns out. I was one of the winners of that year, along with, I said this to you before we started recording, a bunch of other people who are working professionally right now. Jeffrey and Susan Bridges, Teenie Howard, Isaac Goodart, Phil Stevie, Ryan Cady was a really big part of that as well. It's really cool, again, kind of like in retail, to watch everyone like graduate to the big leagues and be like, yeah, we came up together. So my first published comics work was a backup in Witchblade 175, which was really cool because that's an anniversary issue. It got a lot more eyes on it, and Ron Mars wrote it, and I love Kyle Rayner, Green Lantern.
Of course.
And he was so tantamount to shaping and creating that character, so I was like, I'm so honored to be in a book with Ron Mars. And then Top Cow very graciously the next year was doing a bunch of one-shots set in their Aphrodite universe, which they just relaunched, so go check that out from Image Comics. And I wrote Apollo 9, the one shot, which was awesome. And then I did the thing that I think a lot of people do. I kicked around in a bunch of anthologies for a while. So I'm in like Colonial Comics, Love is Love from DCIDW. If you Google me, Not Forgotten, they're just like these weird little characters will kind of pop up here and there. And that's a nice way to break in as well because it's a safe way, because you think telling a 20-page story is going to be really hard, but telling a 6-page story is much harder, but it leaves you less room for error. So I highly recommend people trying to break into anthologies or backup stories.
Absolutely. It's so much safer whenever you're doing something short because you're not putting something out there that's like, if your 4-issue series is going to take 6 months, and people don't realize that from start to end. It's with dealing with an artist and going back and forth, dealing with lettering, editing, coloring, all that kind of just takes time, and it kind of really drains you.
It does, and it's wild when you think like you get your line art back and you're like, this is great, this is the book, and it's not. There's so many steps. And shout out to all the letterers out there. I think they're the unsung heroes of comics.
No, they was no other person in comics that can make your book look professional than a letterer.
Absolutely. Hire a letterer. If you're not paying anyone else, pay your letterer.
Yep. I mean,
1000%.
Steve Wands, Troy Pietri. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, so
I'm sure he'll let us know.
Yeah, I know. But they're both amazing letterers, and I mean, like, something that's a detail for me is I love when, this is super cheesy, but whenever I'm reading a book and writing a book, and the letterer, I will give them a small image to put in the top left corner of the text box, because to me that's one sign of actually being a professional book as opposed to like an unprofessional book, is because you have that like backdrop of like, okay, Batman's talking, like Batman does it, Wolverine does it, X-Men. You'll have that symbol so you'll know who it is.
Yeah, who's narrating.
And it's something that, like, even if you're having your own IP and you put that thing there, it kind of makes a big difference.
It's interesting too how fast you'll be bothered by the shapes of word balloons. You're like, it doesn't look enough like a football. Why does it look like that? Like, it's an insane thing to be focused on, but like you said, it changes so much the tone and like the playing field, I guess, the level that you're playing on. Not that any of that should matter or any of it should stop anyone, but it's really amazing how important lettering is.
It's true. I think it just kind of speaks to, you always want to put out the best possible work for yourself. I think when it comes to, you have a certain quality, because anything you put out, people will go back and read and check on it. Like, who is this Ashley Victoria Robinson person? What has she done? Let me see Jupiter Jet. I want to see what that is.
And hopefully you'll improve and you'll get better with the things that you work on, but I don't think you ever want to put anything out that you feel embarrassed by. And the nice thing about the fact that the comic process is so collaborative and multi-layered is there's a lot of time where you can edit and you can fix. And I think a lot of us use our lettering drafts as a final spell check. We probably shouldn't. Sorry, letterers, but it's kind of our last catch-all,